The invitation was supposed to disappear the second it left my mouth. That was the thing about jokes made by lonely people. Sometimes they sounded too much like hope. "You could always come with me," I said, balancing a cardboard tray of gas station coffee on the hood of my truck while rain crawled across the parking lot in silver lines. I expected Maribel to laugh, or shake her head, or give me the polite smile neighbors use when they want to end conversations without being rude. Instead, she stood there holding a faded blue suitcase in one hand and said, "Okay," not hesitant, not playful. Okay, like the word had already been packed days ago. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood her. The rain tapped against the roof of my camper shell. Somewhere across the apartment courtyard, a dog barked twice and went silent. Mara looked exhausted. Not physically, there's a difference. Physical exhaustion droops. Emotional exhaustion goes on. Her dark hair was damp around the edges of her coat collar, and one of the suitcase wheels kept twitching sideways like it had survived several bad decisions already. "You know I was joking," I said carefully. "I know, because this is a 6-day drive through northern Idaho and western Montana. It's mostly pine trees, cheap motels, and me arguing with satellite radio. That still sounds better than staying here." Then she looked over her shoulder, and I followed her gaze. A man stood beneath the breezeway outside Building B tall. Expensive coat, calm posture, the kind of man who probably lowered his voice instead of raising it. Those were usually the dangerous ones. He wasn't approaching, he was simply watching. That somehow felt worse. "My name is Owen Keller. I was 56 years old that autumn. I repaired vintage watches for a living, which meant I spent most of my days working on things small enough to break quietly. Pocket watches, railroad chronographs, wristwatches inherited from dead fathers and ex-husbands and men who used to matter to someone, tiny gears, delicate springs, hairline fractures most people never notice until time stops moving correctly. Maybe that was why I liked the work. Broken things made sense when they stayed small enough to fit in your hands. People rarely did. I lived outside Spokane in a dull apartment complex with cracked sidewalks and management emails that sounded vaguely threatening no matter what they announced. My wife, Rebecca, had died 4 years earlier. Stroke, sudden. One ordinary Tuesday morning, she was standing in the kitchen arguing with me about tomatoes. By Wednesday evening, I was learning how silence could physically change the shape of a room. After that, I started taking road trips every October. No real destination, just distance. I'd converted an old utility van into a narrow camper myself. Tiny sink, fold-down cot, shelves full of coffee tins and maps and tools. Rebecca used to call it my midlife crisis with windshield wipers. I called it cheaper than therapy. That morning, I'd planned to drive east toward Glacier National Park before snow fully swallowed the roads. 6 days alone. That was the plan. Then Maribel said, "Okay. You leaving now?" she asked. In about 5 minutes, she nodded once. The man across the courtyard finally moved, not fast, not angry, just deliberate. "Mara," he called. "You're embarrassing yourself." Her shoulders tightened so slightly that most people would miss it. I didn't. "You know him?" I asked quietly. "My husband." The word landed strangely. Not husband, not ex-husband, just husband. The present tense can feel like handcuffs. "He doesn't look thrilled," I said. "That's because he hates variables." The man stepped closer beneath the rain-dark awning. "Mara, come upstairs." She stared at him for a long second. Then she turned to me. "Are you actually leaving?" "Yes." "Then please don't change your mind." There are moments in life where common sense taps you gently on the shoulder. This was one of them. A sane man would have asked more questions. A responsible man would have stayed out of it. But lonely people make strange decisions when another lonely person looks at them like a doorway. So I opened the side door of the van. "You can still back out at the stop sign," I said. Mara stared at the open van for one heartbeat. Then she shoved the suitcase inside. Behind us, her husband's voice sharpened. "Mara," not loud, just controlled enough to make the rain itself seem tense. She climbed into the passenger seat. I walked around to the driver's side. Her husband met me halfway. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedar cologne and expensive restraint. "This is a private matter," he said. I looked past him toward Mara, sitting rigidly in my van. Then back at him. "She seems public enough to leave." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what's happening." "No," I admitted. "But I understand someone wanting to get away badly enough to trust a man whose vehicle smells like motor oil and instant coffee." For a split second, something ugly flickered under his polished expression. Then it vanished. "Mara," he said calmly, "you are not well enough to do this." That sentence hit me harder than yelling would have. Not well enough. That was the language people used when they wanted concern to sound noble. Mara rolled down the passenger window. "If you follow us," she said quietly, "I'll send the recordings to your board." The man froze. Interesting. I got into the van, started the engine. The heater coughed awake. Rain crawled across the windshield while the wipers fought to keep up. Neither of us spoke until we reached the first traffic light. Mara sat with both hands clasped too tightly in her lap. She looked like someone holding herself together manually. "You can tell me to turn around," I said. "No. You barely know me. I know you return shopping carts even when nobody's watching." That surprised a laugh out of me. "You've been evaluating my moral character in parking lots?" "I've had a lot of time to observe people lately." The light turned green. I drove. 3 blocks later, she pulled a phone from her coat pocket. 23 missed calls, all from the same contact, Elias. Then she showed me the latest text. "If you leave with him, don't bother coming back." A second text arrived immediately. "You're proving exactly what I warned everyone about." Mara stared at the screen. Then she whispered, "I should explain something before you decide I'm dangerous." I pulled into an empty grocery store parking lot. Rain hammered the roof harder now. The world outside blurred into wet gray smears. "Okay," I said. She looked out the windshield. "My husband is a psychiatrist." That explained the voice, the composure, the terrifying patience. "He's respected," she continued, "published, teaches seminars, volunteers, gives interviews about emotional health. Those are usually the ones who know the right words." Her eyes flicked toward me. "You understand that faster than most people." I shrugged. My wife spent 12 years working in hospital administration. I met enough polished men to know charm and kindness are cousins, not twins. Mara leaned her head back against the seat. "For 18 years, Elias studied people professionally. Imagine what that does to arguments." I waited. He never screamed, never hit walls, never left bruises. He just adjusted reality slowly until I stopped trusting my own reactions. The rain softened briefly, then intensified again. "Like what?" I asked. He'd tell me I sounded emotional when I disagreed with him. He'd repeat private conversations back to me later, with details changed until I questioned my memory. He'd apologize in ways that somehow turned into discussions about my instability. She gave a tired laugh. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "He genuinely believes he's the reasonable one." That felt true. Those people were always the hardest to escape. Mara unlocked her phone and opened a photograph. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I realized it was a sculpture. A woman made from cracked porcelain. Beautiful. But split through the middle like something dropped and carefully rebuilt. Inside the cracks, tiny gold seams glowed. "Did you make that?" I asked. She nodded. "I'm a ceramic artist. The sculpture made my chest ache for reasons I couldn't explain." "There's a gallery in Missoula showing my work next month," she said. "Or there was supposed to be. And Elias hates it? He hates that it exists." She swallowed. "Most of the pieces are about emotional coercion. Not directly, no names, no faces. But he knows." Outside, a truck hissed past on wet pavement. Mara kept staring at the photo. "He said the exhibition would humiliate him professionally. That if people connected the work to our marriage, it would damage his reputation. And Elias values reputation more than sleep." That sounded exhausting. "So this morning," she continued quietly, "he told me if I went through with the exhibit, he'd release copies of my psychiatric evaluations." I blinked. "Your what?" "I had panic attacks after my miscarriage 11 years ago. He encouraged me to seek treatment. Then he kept copies of everything." Cold anger slid carefully into my bloodstream. "He can't legally do that." "He doesn't need to," Mara said. "He just needs me to believe he might." That sentence stayed with me. Manipulative people rarely need actual power. Fear usually does the heavy lifting for them. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Unknown number, I ignored it. A second later, another message arrived. "Ask her about Simon." I frowned. Mara noticed immediately. "What?" I hesitated. "Mistake. Emotionally intelligent people always notice hesitation." "He texted you, didn't he?" I handed her the phone. She read the message once, then closed her eyes. "Of course. Who's Simon?" She was quiet for a long moment. "My brother." Something in her voice warned me not to rush, so I didn't. "He died 3 years ago," she said eventually. "I'm sorry. He was an alcoholic." The words sounded rehearsed, like they'd been used publicly many times. "But?" I asked gently. Mara stared at rainwater sliding down the windshield. "But Elias convinced everyone Simon was unstable long before he actually became unstable." I waited. "Simon hated him from the beginning," she continued. "Said Elias talked to people like experiments. They fought constantly. And when Simon relapsed after 2 years sober, Elias told my parents it might be safer if we stopped enabling him emotionally." My stomach tightened. Mara rubbed her thumb against the edge of her phone. "Simon died alone in a motel outside Boise 6 months later." I didn't speak. Sometimes silence is more respectful than comfort. Mara's voice lowered. "Now Elias likes implying I destroy men who try to protect me." I understood the trick immediately. Plant doubt early. Make future kindness feel dangerous. Classic. I started the engine again. "So," I said lightly, "good news." She looked over. "I've never had heroic instincts in my life." That surprised a small laugh out of her. The first real one. It changed her entire face. And that scared me more than her husband did. Because attraction at my age wasn't explosive. It was quieter, more dangerous. Like realizing warmth had returned to a room you'd already accepted as cold. We drove east through pine forests soaked dark by rain. The farther we got from Spokane, the steadier Mara's breathing became. But every 20 minutes her phone lit up again. Calls, texts, voicemails. Finally she powered it off. Good choice, I said. Feels illegal. Freedom usually does at first. That earned me another glance, the kind that lingered half a second too long. Around noon, we stopped at a roadside diner outside Coeur d'Alene. The place had vinyl booths, crooked framed fishing photos, and coffee strong enough to restart machinery. Mara chose the seat facing the entrance automatically. Trauma leaves fingerprints on behavior. I noticed. Sorry, she murmured. Don't apologize for survival habits. A waitress named Darlene called me sweetheart 3 times before bringing pancakes the size of steering wheels. For 20 minutes, we pretended to be ordinary travelers. Mara asked about watch repair. I told her about a client who mailed me a pocket watch wrapped inside frozen salmon because he thought it would protect the gears. That cannot be real. I smelled like trout for 2 days. She laughed hard enough to cover her mouth. People recovering from fear often laugh like they've rediscovered oxygen. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time it included a photograph. The diner, my van, taken from across the highway. Mara saw my expression before I even turned the screen toward her. Color drained from her face. A second message arrived. You think leaving changes the story? I stood too quickly. Coffee sloshed across the table. Owen, Mara warned. But I was already moving. Outside, cold rain slapped against my neck. Cars hissed past on wet asphalt. Across the highway, a black SUV idled beside a gas pump. Tinted windows, engine running. The SUV pulled away slowly before I could reach the curb. Not panicked, not rushed, just controlled. Like someone reminding us that distance didn't equal safety. Back inside, Mara sat perfectly still. That's his favorite trick, she said quietly. What is? Making people feel observed. I slid back into the booth. Well, good news for him. She looked up. I already feel self-conscious in flannel. This changes nothing. A tired smile touched her mouth, but her hands were shaking. That afternoon we crossed into Montana under bruised gray skies. The mountains rose slowly around us. Pine trees. Fog. Long wet roads twisted through valleys that looked ancient enough to outlive every human problem. Mara stared out the window for most of the drive. Finally, she asked, why did your wife leave you alone? I glanced over. That's a cheerful road trip question. You know what I mean. I did. People who've lost someone recognize each other eventually. Rebecca didn't leave me, I said softly. Her body did. Mara waited. The stroke damaged too much, too fast. Machines kept her alive another 9 days. I swallowed. There came a point where the doctors stopped talking about recovery and started talking about percentages. Rain ticked softly against the windshield. My son wanted more time, I continued. More procedures, more intervention. And you didn't? The question held no judgment. That somehow made honesty easier. No, I admitted. The word hurt even years later. I loved her enough to know she would hated surviving like that. Mara stared ahead quietly. So I signed the papers. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Afterward, my son stopped calling for almost a year. I'm sorry. I understand why he was angry. But grief turns everyone into unreliable witnesses. That sat between us for miles. Then Mara reached over carefully and rested her hand against my forearm. Not romantic, not dramatic, just human. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone touched me gently. That was the dangerous thing about loneliness. It made ordinary tenderness feel enormous. We reached Missoula after sunset. I rented adjoining motel rooms because I suddenly became very aware of appearances. Mara noticed immediately. You think I'm going to accuse you of kidnapping me? No, I said. I think I'm a man alone with a beautiful woman who's emotionally wrecked, and I'd rather be careful than flattering. She studied me for a second, then nodded slowly. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. The motel smelled faintly like bleach and old carpet. My room had a broken ice machine outside and curtains patterned with aggressive pine cones. Luxury. Around midnight, somebody knocked on my door. 3 quiet taps. I opened it to find Mara standing there barefoot in sweatpants and one of those oversized university hoodies people keep long after relationships end. You okay? I asked immediately. No. She held up her powered-on phone. I listened to the voicemails. Emotional self-harm disguised as curiosity. Common. Come in, I said. She sat on the edge of the bed while I made terrible motel coffee. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Mara said quietly, do you know what the worst part about manipulation is? What? You start missing the person hurting you. That landed hard, because it sounded true. He left me 14 voicemails, she continued. Half were cruel, half sounded worried. That's intentional. I know. She rubbed her eyes. And still part of me wanted to call him. I handed her a coffee cup. You spent 18 years building emotional reflexes around one person, I said. You don't break habits like that overnight. She looked up. Were you always this emotionally literate? No, I said. My wife weaponized therapy language against me until I improved. That startled a laugh out of her. Then she became serious again. There's something else I haven't told you. Of course there was. Road trips like this attract secrets the way thunderstorms attract static. I had an affair once, she said. The confession entered the room quietly. I appreciate the honesty, I replied. It lasted 3 months. With who? A sculptor from Seattle. She stared at the coffee in her hands. I think Elias suspects the exhibition includes pieces inspired by that period. And does it? Yes. She swallowed hard. I'm not proud of it. You don't have to perform shame for me. Mara looked startled. I'm serious, I said gently. Lonely marriages make people hungry in strange directions. It wasn't even really about him, she admitted. The affair, I mean. Then what was it about? She looked directly at me. Being seen. The honesty of that sentence hollowed the room out. After a while, she whispered, Elias found out eventually. And he forgave me. Something about the way she said forgave made my stomach tighten. He used it afterward, didn't he? All the time? Of course. Mercy becomes leverage in the wrong hands. Mara stared at the rain slipping down the motel window. He said my guilt proved I was emotionally unstable. I exhaled, slowly. And after enough years, she continued, I started believing him. I sat beside her carefully. Not too close. People recovering from control notice pressure immediately. You know what I think? I said. What? I think emotionally healthy people don't spend 18 years making someone feel smaller. For a second, Mara looked like she might cry. Instead, she laughed once. You're surprisingly dangerous for a man who owns 3 thermoses. 4, my mistake. She finally returned to her room around 2 in the morning. I didn't sleep much afterward. Not because I was afraid, because hope is loud. The next morning, snow dusted the mountains, thin white lines across dark ridges. Mara looked calmer over diner eggs and burnt toast, until she checked her email. Then all the color disappeared from her face. What? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. The gallery had postponed her exhibition. No explanation. Just cautious legal language. We regret the circumstances. That bastard contacted them, I muttered. Mara stared at the email. No, she whispered. What? She pointed lower. Attached was a statement supposedly written by her. It claimed her artwork had been emotionally exaggerated due to unresolved psychiatric distress. My jaw tightened. He forged this? No, she looked sick. I wrote it 2 years ago after a panic attack. Elias told me documenting emotional states was therapeutic. There it was again. Control disguised as care. Mara suddenly stood. I need air. Outside, cold mountain winds sliced through the parking lot. She walked several yards away before stopping beside a snowbank. I gave her space. Eventually, she spoke without turning around. You know the worst thing about intelligent manipulators? Tell me. They use your honesty against future versions of you. I had no answer to that, because she was right. We drove north toward Flathead Lake after breakfast. The roads narrowed. Snow thickened in the higher elevations. Around midday, Mara finally asked, Why are you really helping me? Fair question. I considered lying. Instead, I said, Because I know what emotional drowning looks like. She looked over. Rebecca had depression for years before the stroke. Quiet depression. Functional depression. The van heater hummed softly. Toward the end, she started apologizing for existing too loudly. Mara's expression changed. One night she cried because she dropped a plate, I continued. And I realized she'd been shrinking herself around everyone for so long that accidents felt like moral failures. The memory still hurts. I promised myself after she died that if I ever recognized that look in someone else, I wouldn't ignore it. Mara turned toward the window quickly. I pretended not to notice her wiping her eyes. That afternoon, we rented a lakeside cabin outside Big Fork. 1 room, 2 beds, again deliberate, again noticed. You really are careful, Mara said quietly while unpacking. I'm old enough to know timing matters. Meaning? Meaning emotionally vulnerable people deserve safety more than chemistry. She stared at me for a long moment, then looked away too fast. That evening, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets while snow drifted through pine trees. The lake looked black under the cloudy sky. Mara held a mug of tea between both hands. My mother used to say winter reveals strong houses, she murmured. She sounds wise. She was anxious. Those overlap more than people admit. That earned another smile. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Video file. Mara froze. Don't open it if you don't want to, I said. She did anyway. The video showed our cabin, recorded from the trees. My blood went cold. A voice behind the camera said calmly, You always run towards strangers when you're frightened. Mara shut the phone off immediately. Snow drifted silently around us. Neither of us moved. Then the headlights appeared down the road, slow, approaching. Mara stood so fast that the blanket fell. Owen, I know. The vehicle stopped outside the cabin, not Elias. A woman climbed out instead, mid-40s, dark coat, nervous posture. Mara stared. Oh God, who is that? My sister. The woman approached the porch carefully. Mara didn't answer. The woman looked exhausted, like someone carrying guilt physically. My name's Lydia, she said to me quietly. Please tell me she's okay. Mara finally found her voice. How did you find me? Lydia looked miserable. He put a location tag in your suitcase lining. Mara went still, not shocked, just tired in a deeper way. I told him that was insane, Lydia continued quickly. He said he was worried about your mental state. Of course he did. Snow collected in Lydia's hair. Mara, you need to know something. Mara crossed her arms tightly. What? I signed a statement for Elias. There it was. Betrayal rarely arrives dramatically. Usually it sounds apologetic. Lydia's voice shook. He said you were spiraling emotionally. He said your art was becoming obsessive. He said he was trying to protect you professionally. Mara laughed once, sharp. Did you believe him? Lydia started crying immediately. That's the worst part, she whispered. I think part of me did. Mara looked like someone had struck her across the face. My own sister. I know. No, Mara said quietly. You really don't. Lydia wiped at her eyes. He paid for Noah's rehab last year, she admitted. There it was, dependency. Control's favorite currency. I kept telling myself he was helping our family, Lydia whispered. But every favor came with pressure attached. Mara stared out toward the dark lake. Snow drifted silently between them. Then the headlights appeared again farther down the road. Different vehicle, slow. Deliberate, Lydia looked terrified. He followed me. Of course he did. The SUV stopped beside the cabin. Elias stepped out wearing black gloves and that same impossible composure. For a moment, nobody spoke. Snow settled on coat shoulders. Then he looked at me. Mr. Keller, he said calmly. I appreciate your concern, but this has gone far enough. Mara's entire body tightened. I moved slightly closer to her without thinking. Elias noticed. Interesting. Mara, he continued softly. You are exhausted, frightened, and behaving impulsively. That's one interpretation, she replied. It's the accurate one. There was no anger in his voice. That made it worse. Lydia suddenly spoke. She knows about the tracker. For the first time, Elias looked annoyed, only for a second. Then calm returned. I was worried about her safety. You filmed our cabin from the woods, I said. You misunderstand context. Ah, yes. Manipulators loved context, especially when reality became inconvenient. Mara, Elias said gently, you're having a trauma response. I've treated enough patients to recognize dissociation when I see it. Mara laughed bitterly. You hear that, Owen? Even my panic gets professionally diagnosed now. Elias ignored me entirely. Smart. People like him rarely acknowledge secondary players unless necessary. You stopped taking your medication 6 weeks ago, he told her quietly. Mara flinched. That caught my attention. You told me it was making me numb, she whispered. I told you consistency mattered. After increasing the dosage without telling me, the air shifted. Even Lydia looked stunned. Elias sighed like a disappointed teacher. You were emotionally volatile. I was grieving. For a miscarriage that happened 11 years ago. The cruelty of that sentence hit the porch like broken glass. Mara physically recoiled. And suddenly I understood something important. The most dangerous people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who know exactly where your wounds are. Because they help name them. Mara, Elias said softly. Come home. No, think carefully. I have been thinking carefully for 18 years. Snow thickened around us. Elias finally looked directly at me. You believe she's telling you the full story. I believe frightened people usually deserve patience. She had an affair. Mara closed her eyes. Ah, public shame. Predictable. I know, I said. That surprised him. Interesting again. Elias adjusted his gloves. She becomes emotionally dependent on men who rescue her. Mara looked humiliated. I kept my voice calm. Then maybe she should stop meeting men who enjoy having someone dependent on them. That landed. For the first time, Elias lost composure completely. Only briefly, but enough. His expression hardened. You have no idea what kind of damage she causes. Mara stepped forward before I could stop her. No, she said quietly. He has no idea what kind of damage you normalize. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then Lydia spoke. I recorded your phone calls. Everyone turned toward her. Lydia was shaking. But she kept going. You coached me on what to say about Mara's mental state. You told me emotional women rewrite reality. Elias stared at her like a scientist watching a failed experiment. You're confused. No, Lydia whispered. I'm finally embarrassed. Elias exhaled slowly, then he smiled, and somehow that felt more threatening than anger. You think anyone will believe this? He asked quietly. Mara answered before Lydia could. I do. The confidence in her voice startled even her. I saw it happen. That tiny moment where fear loosened one finger at a time. Elias heard it too. That was when he made his mistake. You were unstable long before me, he snapped. Not loud, but sharp enough to crack the performance. Lydia stared at him. So did Mara. And there it was. The man underneath the careful voice. Elias realized it immediately. Too late. Mara lifted her phone. The recording screen glowed bright in the snowy dark. His eyes changed. For 1 second, real panic surfaced. Then police lights flashed down the road. Apparently, Lydia had called them before arriving. Smart woman. Everything after that blurred into statements and explanations and controlled damage. Elias never raised his voice. Never threatened anyone directly. Men like him understood optics too well. But the officers took the tracker seriously. They took the recorded conversation seriously. And most importantly, they finally looked at Mara like a witness instead of a diagnosis. Elias left before midnight. Not arrested. Life rarely resolves itself that neatly. But something had shifted. Power depends heavily on invisibility. Once exposed, it starts losing oxygen. After the police departed, the cabin became very quiet. Lydia hugged her sister for a long time before driving away. Mara cried only after the headlights disappeared. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just exhausted tears from a woman who'd spent years holding herself upright emotionally. I sat beside her on the porch steps while snow gathered around our boots. Eventually, she whispered, "I don't know who I am without defending myself anymore." I understood that better than she realized. After Rebecca died, people kept asking how I was doing. Then, eventually, they stopped. And I discovered grief can become an identity if you aren't careful. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," I said. Mara leaned against my shoulder carefully, like someone testing whether comfort was allowed. Neither of us moved for a long time. The lake stayed black and endless below the trees. Snow fell softly enough to feel forgiving. 6 months later, Mara's exhibition opened in Seattle under a new title, Fault Lines. The porcelain woman with gold-filled cracks stood in the center gallery beneath warm lights. Hundreds of people came. Critics wrote long essays about emotional architecture and feminine fracture and modern coercion. Mara hated most of the reviews. "They sound like graduate students trapped in haunted bookstores," she whispered to me during the opening. I laughed hard enough to embarrass us both. Elias never fully disappeared from her life. People like that rarely do. His professional image developed fractures. Former patients spoke, former colleagues started asking uncomfortable questions. Reputation decays slowly, still counts. Lydia and Mara rebuilt carefully. Coffee first, then phone calls, then honesty. Family healing isn't cinematic, it's repetitive, quiet, sometimes awkward. As for me, I still take road trips every October. Only now there are 2 coffee mugs rattling around in the van. A box of ceramic tools is beneath the passenger seat. And a woman beside me who occasionally rests her hand over mine at stoplights like she's still surprised I'm real. Sometimes we drive for hours without talking. Not because there's nothing left to say. Because peace finally stopped feeling suspicious. And every now and then, when rain streaks across the windshield and mountains rise dark ahead of us, Mara smiles softly and says, "You know that joke probably saved my life. I always pretend to think about it first." Then I tell her the truth. "No," I say, "you did the hard part yourself, but secretly I still think about that parking lot, the rain, the suitcase, that single impossible word." Okay. And sometimes I wonder how many lives change because one lonely person accidentally sounds sincere at exactly the right moment. If you've ever had a completely unexpected conversation that changed the direction of your life, tell me about it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you a while, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.